Hello and welcome to the Doofcast, a film and TV podcast from Doof Media. My name is Scott Daly.
And I'm Mike Flanagan.
No, Matt, you're not Mike Flanagan. We're here to talk about Mike Flanagan.
Monologues.
Jesus Christ. This week on the show, we're going to do something a little bit different, Matt. We were trying to decide earlier in the week what we would do this week. We don't have a new movie to review. We are kind of in between Deconstructing Directors series, and Scott forgot to set up the poll to vote for which film should be nominated for a canon, so we're doing that next week. So we were like, crap, what do we do? And we thought, let's just talk about one of our favorite working directors right now, Mr. Mike Flanagan. This is not a Deconstructing Directors series. We're not spending the next 10 weeks on Mike Flanagan, but we just really wanted to talk about Mr. Flanagan, his films, and maybe more specifically, the show that he did that came out last year on Netflix, Midnight Mass.
Yeah. The way I'm viewing this show is I really wanted to just tell everybody that they should watch Midnight Mass. And I tried to find a way to just form an entire episode around that concept.
And here it is. No idea how this is going to go, but that's what we're going to do. And then we're going to have a brief conversation at the end of this about the newest Disney Pixar film, Turning Red. And then we'll wrap everything out talking about the latest Oscar news. Because, Matt, did you know the Oscars are this weekend? Because the Oscars are this weekend.
I didn't know we had Oscars anymore. But
yeah, they do those. I guess they do those.
All right. I guess I'll try to watch those. Oh, wait, no, I have no way of doing that. Cool.
Oh, good job, Academy.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get right into our main segment of the week, and let's talk about Mr. Mike Flanagan. Matt, what is Mike Flanagan all about?
He's about a bunch of TV shows mainly, and movies also, and it's pretty good director.
Yeah,
I guess writer too. Is that?
Yeah, writer director for sure. Yeah. Mike Flanagan, for those that don't know, is a horror, I guess we'd say, director and writer. I think the majority of the films and the television shows he's produced would fall firmly in the horror genre. But it even feels weird to say that. And I think the big thing we have to get off our chest here right now, Matt, is that Mike Flanagan is Stephen King reincarnated. And yeah, I know what you're saying. You're saying, Scott, Stephen King's not dead. And you're right. However, he did almost die. And my theory is that when he almost died in the year 1999, it triggered the reincarnation effect. And therefore we got Mike Flanagan. And now you're saying, Scott, that doesn't make any sense. Mike Flanagan was born in 1978. And to that I say, shut up.
Yeah, it doesn't follow the normal time rules. That's all. Look, I mean, like if what you're just describing were something that happened in the Dark Tower, I would just be like, yeah, there's so what? Yeah, there's no reason why it would follow the normal timeline. Of course
not. All joking aside, I think one thing that is undoubtedly true about Mike Flanagan is that he is a big Stephen King fan, and Stephen King was very influential on him as a storyteller. And I think that is reflected in the way he approaches the media he does. He lives in the horror genre just like Stephen King so often lives in the horror genre. But what he's really doing is inspecting character, really diving into really interesting things about, how horror can be a reflection of the terrible things that are inside us and the terrible things that we go through and how we find ways to grow past those things. And I don't know, like there's something about the way he writes, like the joke about Mike Flanagan, the joke that we made at the start of this podcast is that the man really loves to write a good monologue. And that is true. If you watch the show Midnight Mass, it's like every episode has a 5-minute monologue somewhere buried into it. But like, I don't understand why we say that thing and then just assume that everyone else has understood that we mean that badly. Like that just the assumption is, oh, guy sure writes a lot of monologues and that's bad. Why exactly is that a bad thing? Because he does, but they're fantastic.
Yeah, right. Well, it's like it's from, the tradition of the soliloquy where, it's I mean, a soliloquy technically is a character talking to themselves, but the basic idea that we have here is you're using an artistic technique of letting the character lay out their thesis in long form, and you really get to understand them. You really get to learn a lot about them. It's its own dramatic idiom. I mean, I guess that's one thing I would say is like the way people talk in movies is already not the way they talk in real life.
Sure.
So if you're willing to, or like in musicals, the way people behave in musicals is obviously not the way they behave in real life. So if we're willing to extend just a little bit of charity toward the idea that in this universe people have monologues, then you'll just really enjoy it, because actually, like you said, they're incredibly well written.
Yeah.
They really give the actors like just a tremendous opportunity to just utterly flex.
Mm-hmm.
And some of these actors are just so great. And so, giving them the opportunity to just hold the camera on them while they just dig into some really powerful dramatic material, you just can't take your eyes off the screen, and you start looking forward to that part of the episode, actually.
Yeah, for sure. One thing that is definitely true about Mike Flanagan is that he tends to work with the same actors. The Haunting of Hill House, The Haunting of Bly Manor, and Midnight Mass, his 3 big Netflix television series. He's used some of the same actors over and over again. His wife, Kate Siegel, ends up in a lot of his stuff, but Carla Gugino, Henry Thomas, these are people that end up in the Flanagan crew. And I think what that does is it causes him to write for the actor. So he's writing these monologues. Like, one of the best monologues that I think Flanagan has ever written is like the capstone of the Midnight Mass show. The ending scene of the Midnight Mass show is a very long monologue by one of our characters, the character who happens to be played by Mike Flanagan's wife, Kate Siegel. So I think you could be safe in saying he knows her pretty well, and he knows how to write to her strengths. And not only is that an incredibly written monologue, it is a flawlessly performed monologue. I want to get into that with you. We're going to have a section of this podcast where we just like talk about that show and spoilers a little bit, just briefly, because I think we have to. But here at the beginning, I just want to say that yeah, the idea that he works with a pretty set stable of actors allows him to play to those actors' strengths in a lot of interesting ways, especially in these Shakespearean monologues.
Mm-hmm. You've definitely seen more of his stuff than me. I mean, basically, I guess we'll just to put it up front. I mean, he's done a bunch of stuff, but I've only seen Dr. Sleep, which we talked about on our Patreon bonus podcast, where we talk about Stephen King adaptations. And then I've seen the show Midnight Mass, and I think you've seen a bunch more of it, but I've seen enough to basically be like, this guy is really good. Yeah,
I've seen everything he's done.
Okay. Wow.
Because I mean, that's not entirely true. He did a bunch of short films before he really struck big that I have not seen. But starting with his kind of big break, I guess we'll call it, is the film Oculus, which is probably his biggest film released at that point in his career, up and through Midnight Mass that came out last year. I've seen everything, and it's there's just something about him, something about the way he imagines the world, the way he writes. I remember watching Oculus, not knowing what it was. It was just one of those things that people won't remember this, but back in the early 2010s, Netflix was just a thing that just had a bunch of random shit on it that wasn't, all Netflix original programming. It was just, they would buy movies and dump them on there. And so you'd just be like searching through Netflix, and you would just find something and say, oh, that's interesting. And I clicked on Oculus, and that was basically it. It was like, that looks, I feel like watching a horror movie. That looks creepy. And it's this fascinating concept because it's basically just a horror movie. There's a spooky mirror. And it's like any and every bad horror movie you think you would want to find, right? Like, it's just like, it's such the same kind of thing where you'd spend 2 hours watching a bad horror movie and be like, I wasted my time. And yet it's fascinating and interesting and is doing things, and I'm trying to speak very vaguely here, that I just did not expect a movie of this type to do. Like, I was immediately like, oh, this is interesting. Who is this guy? He's really interesting. I'm really into this. And then he continues on. He makes the movie Hush, which is a terrifying movie. I think the only real error in his career he's made, I would say, is his third film, Before I Wake, which is an incredibly ambitious movie about a child whose dreams come to life, including his nightmares, played by Jacob Tremblay. It doesn't work very well. It's just not a very good movie. But I think he would even admit to that and say, yeah, I learned a lot. I learned a lot from that movie, and it allowed me to do the next thing. Which, Matt, the next movie after that Mike Flanagan made is a movie called Ouija, Origin of Evil, which is a sequel to the Ouija board movie, which is ridiculous.
Right.
So just so we're clear here, the original Ouija board movie was terrible. It was awful. And then they made a sequel, and Mike Flanagan wrote and directed it and made it an origin story, and it's fucking great.
Okay.
It's like the weirdest thing. Like, I never even saw the sequel, or I never even saw the original, because who wants to see a Ouija board movie? That sounds terrible. And then like this new one came out, and like all the horror people I follow on Twitter and the internet are like, no, this movie fucking rocks, y'all. And I was like, no, stop it. And so I watched it, and it's awesome. It like, you don't need to have seen the first movie because it's an origin story. Basically, it felt like what Mike Flanagan did is he had an idea for a 1960s period piece horror movie, and someone came to him and said, will you direct this sequel to Ouija? And he's like, yeah, I got this idea. Can I put those two things together? And they were like, yeah, sure, whatever.
Yeah,
why not?
Right,
and so he got to make the movie he wanted to make and put a big name on it, and therefore it becomes this Flanagan film in the best ways possible. And it's delightful.
That's so great. That's such a great story. Just it's always fun when directors come in and just do an absolutely amazing artistic job on some material or property that absolutely doesn't deserve it. But
yeah. And then his next big film after that, Matt, is Gerald's Game, which, as you know, maybe I think is a Stephen King adaptation. So he's actually done two of King's novels, Gerald's Game being the first, and then Dr. Sleep, which we'll talk about in a sec. The thing about Gerald's Game, Matt and audience, is I'm going to spoil the concept of Gerald's Game for y'all. I hope that's okay, Matt.
I think that'll be okay.
Gerald's Game is a movie about a woman and her husband who go out to their lake house in the middle of nowhere, and he wants to bang, but he wants to do something new and sexy. So he handcuffs her to the bed with these like fucking police grade, incredibly powerful handcuffs. And then right when they're about to do it, they get in a fight. Oops, he has a heart attack. He dies. She's handcuffed to the bed. Oh no. It's like the classic, really fascinating, wonderful Stephen King concept where you just hear it and you're like, oh man, that's going to have some good drama. And it is. The problem is, how do you make a movie out of that? Yeah. Because it's basically just a woman trapped to a bed for 200 pages trying to figure out how to get out of it. And obviously she dives very internal to herself. She's like confronting things in her past, some terrible things that have happened to her, and how those terrible things reflect now upon her current situation. And she's basically like, she sees two versions of herself that she's talking to and friends that she's talking to. And so that's where the dialogue comes from, but you can't really film that. But man, Flanagan takes this concept. He takes what I really thought was an unfilmable story and makes an incredible, tense, wonderful, frightening, powerful movie out of it. Gerald's Game is so good. I want you to watch this movie, Matt. It's one of those things where I'm not sure if I want you to watch the movie first or read the book first. I don't know. But man, it's such a good movie.
Yeah, I really want to watch the movie. I think this is maybe one of those times when I feel like I'm already totally spoiled on the idea of the show and or the idea of the story. So watching the movie first wouldn't really lose me anything. But anyway, yeah, I just wanted to comment, like what you just described, like telling the story of someone's interiority using the techniques of film does seem like his forte, just based off of what I've seen. Like Dr. Sleep, we're going to talk about in a second, but it has all, it has a lot of like psychic, like in people's minds stuff. And he's just so good at that. Like it's just so good. And then also Midnight Mass, like it's, just ways of visually depicting someone's inner struggle. Using all sorts of, I'm trying to avoid being specific, but she's using all sorts of clever modes of film techniques that, some of which I'd never seen before, and I just thought were incredibly like fresh and upsetting in certain ways.
There are moments in Midnight Mass where I am just like, how did you did you do that? Like in a way,
Yeah.
like it's not even like it's the most complicated filmmaking techniques. It's just the perfect technique to get across what is going on in the character's head at this particular time, where just like you're kind of just like flabbergasted at the genius of it.
I'm sure we're both thinking of the same thing.
I think we actually are. We'll get to that in a bit. Yeah. But from there, Mike Flanagan gets to start making his TV shows. The first is The Haunting of Hill House, which, if you like Midnight Mass, what are you doing? Go watch Hill House right now. So this is very, 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 very loosely based on the Shirley Jackson novel of the same name. I like. It's not. It's based on it in that it has the name of it, and like I guess technically there are some similar names, but nothing else. It is this wonderful, wonderful horror story. Where I mean, here's I'll spoil something. Ghosts are trauma in this show. Like ghosts represent trauma, and so we're exploring this family that went through a very traumatic thing when they were younger, and so the movie or the television show is kind of cutting back and forth between the family all grown up and their current relationships, and then the things that happened to them when they lived in this house as children, and how that's informed their life and how they're dealing with it and how that all reflects everything. And it's I'm in this mode right now where I'm trying to decide whether I think Midnight Mass or Hill House is the best thing Flanagan has ever done. I think they are both stupendous and wonderful, and I don't even know if I want to like come down on which is better side. But it's a tour de force, that show. And here's what I'll say: Netflix shows are usually bad in that they don't have any kind of. There's no reason for an episode to exist. It's just when the algorithm says is the opportune time to put a break between binging to ensure maximal binging. Every one of these episodes means something. It is telling a distinct story, and it is important to the overall arc of the show as well.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
So,
yeah.
Finally, you get to talk, but that is The Haunting of Hill House. I cannot recommend it enough. Seriously, it's also one of the scariest things I've ever watched. By the way, Flanagan does this thing in this show where he puts like 7,000 ghosts in it, and like ones that you notice, but there's also like in every given scene, there's probably like a ghost just hanging out in the background, only partially in frame, and so there's moments in the show where you're watching it and you just feel scared and you're not sure why you feel scared. And it's because there's a fucking creepy face in the background that your conscious mind hasn't picked up on, but your subconscious mind has seen and unsettled you. And it's wild. Yeah. It's absolutely wild.
I mean, one thing I'll say again, speaking vaguely, is like, I'm not a connoisseur of horror films, but based on what I've seen, he just uses techniques to make you frightened or unsettled or creeped out that I've just never seen hardly anywhere else. Like there's almost nothing I've ever seen has made like the hair stand up on my body.
Yeah.
As much as he is able to do in his movies.
Oh yeah. And it's rarely jump scary type, build suspense and then boom, scary moment. It's mostly just like, here's an incredibly unsettling image that I'm going to put center frame in the camera, and then you're going to want me to cut away from it really bad, and I'm refusing to do it. Or here, I'm going to set up a motif either through a sound or through a camera movement or through a light source that clues you in that something terrifying is about to happen, and you know what's about to happen, and I'm going to hold on that for a while, and then I'm going to cut to that specific thing, even though you knew it was going to happen, and it's still going to scare the shit out of you because you've just been like, you just mind fucked by all my motifs that I'm throwing in. Gosh, there's so many good things about this. I can't wait till we get to talk about some of this in a little more detail. But
yeah, me too.
And of course, the next thing he does after that is Dr. Sleep. He takes the sequel to Stephen King's The Shining, and manages to make a sequel to Stanley Kubrick's The Shining that is somehow worthy of both of that book and that movie. So you have not read either The Shining or its sequel, Midnight Mass, not yet anyway. But of course,
Dr. Sleep. The sequel, Doctor Sleep.
Yeah. Jesus, yeah, sorry. You've not read The Shining or its sequel, Doctor Sleep. And of course you have seen The Shining, the movie, many, many times. Right. So, and you love this movie. So let's do like a abbreviated version of our other levels of the tower. What did you love so much about Doctor Sleep?
I don't know, man. Like, it's just so fun. Like, it's such a well put together, from beginning, middle to end story, focusing on this character who's really interesting, and just, man, it's funny when a movie is just really good. Sometimes you run out of things to say because you're just like, I don't know, it just does everything right. Like, from the fundamentals of storytelling perspective, it has some fantastically great moments in it. It has some fantastic visuals that they're I've seen the movie once, but they're just burned into my mind.
Yeah.
The concepts, they're all from King's novel, but I feel like whatever Flanagan has done to visually convey a lot of these concepts is clearly brilliant. And also just like it's one of those movies that's just like a very satisfying story where you just you walk away from the movie just feeling like, wow,
it's one of those movies that feels big. Like it feels like a novel to me.
Yeah.
And this is something that I think is very, very difficult to capture because, novels are so much longer. They are allowed to explore such a range of emotion and events, in both plot and theming and all these things. And this is a movie that I feel like I run through that gamut. Like, this is a movie that touches me to my core, that I cry during in these incredibly powerful scenes. But it's also a movie that is very fun. As you said, it's very funny. It's very intriguing. I think Flanagan in this movie captures everything. Like, if I meet someone that doesn't read a lot, but wants to understand why I like Stephen King, this is the movie to show them. Because I think this captures everything that makes a Stephen King story compelling, because it has these, as you said, these wonderful concepts, like just the concept of the bad guys and what they want and how they're getting it is so intriguing. And yet it also takes the time to characterize all these people. Like, we have our Dan Torrance main character, the grown up version of the character from The Shining. And we're doing all this very interesting stuff with how he has lived his life since the events of The Shining and what he has become and how he's struggling with his past and his legacy and becoming the person he wants to be. And then at the same time, we introduce these characters in the True Knot, which are a completely new invention, nothing based in The Shining at all. But the book takes a lot of time to characterize who these people are and what they want. And it's not as if we make them sympathetic. They're terrible, terrible people. But like, the movie also takes the time to show, hey, these are like people that like they really enjoy living, right? And so they've made a decision long ago that they're going to do whatever it takes to go on existing, and you understand how they've justified these terrible acts they do, and you see them suffering. And like there's a scene in this movie where I think the eldest member of the True Knot passes away, and it's this genuine scene that Flanagan allows to play out in all its emotionality. Like, all these people are really sad that this guy died. And Flanagan sits on the scene for a long time. And these are the bad guys. They murder a child in this movie in the most gruesome, terrifying way. And yet we're allowed to sit with them in this moment of despair.
Yeah, I think that's one of the great things about him is he's interested in like the honesty of the storytelling. And conceptually, basically the bad guys, they're you can view them as a sort of vampire, but it's like a twist on the idea where you're not just twisting it for the sake of twisting it. You're exploring it in a way where you've never really thought about it this way before. It's making you consider it more seriously and more deeply than you had before.
Yeah. And I mean, just the idea, again, we talked about this on other levels of the tower. So you should support us on Patreon if you want to hear a more detailed version of this, but this is like the Shining movie and book are like infamous in the fact that they're so different from each other, and that the creator of one hates the other, and maybe vice versa for Kubrick.
Right.
And yet Mike Flanagan steps up to the plate and says, you know what I think I can do? I think I can take that book, and I think I can take that movie, and I think I can do a service to both of them at the same time in the sequel.
Mm-hmm.
And he pulls it off, folks. He pulls it off. This is a movie that pays homage to Kubrick's version of The Shining in beautiful, beautiful ways, while also still being true to, I think, the core theme and idea of King's version of that story, and why he disliked Kubrick's version of his story so much. It does all those. It does both of those things simultaneously in ways that don't feel cheap, don't feel gimmicky. There's no point in this where we feel like we're watching Ready Player One with its stupid Shining sequence that made me so angry. It doesn't feel like we're just saying, "Hey, remember The Shining." No, it earns every little last bit of that.
Yeah, that's a good word for the movie. That it takes the time to earn everything that it does.
Mm-hmm.
I think we live in an age where a lot of the writing that you see is rushing to the moment where you're supposed to cry, and you don't, because it wasn't set up properly.
Yeah,
it's funny, we talked a little bit about this on our episode of Kingslingers this week, because the discussion question was, what makes a tragic death work? And many of the answers, I think, correctly pointed out that what makes a tragic death work is really not the moment of the tragic death. It's all the work you put in before that moment to establish the connection with the character, and, in other words, earn that moment. And I think everything Flanagan does, he really understands that, like, very deeply, that, like, he's going to take you to really dramatic places, but he's going to take his time in getting there, and he's going to make sure that he's built you up to it where you're totally bought in by the time you get there.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I think nothing captures that idea better than Midnight Mass, his newest thing, the latest thing he's made. Midnight Mass, for those that don't know, is a 7-episode series on Netflix. Netflix has been very good to Mr. Flanagan. I think that's safe to say. I don't know how to begin talking about this show. I think at the jump we'll say it's remarkable in every single way, and if you haven't watched it yet, like, you should do it. Like, I want to talk about the show in detail. I want to talk about it in spoilers, because I don't know any other way to talk about this show than to talk about what it's actually about. And I feel like the show does a very fun thing where it doesn't fully reveal what it's actually about until a few episodes in, and I don't want to spoil that reveal for anyone listening to this that hasn't checked it out.
Yeah, I guess speaking about it vaguely, I mean, I would say, number one, just watch the first episode, right? And if you don't like it's not one of those shows where I say, like, oh, well, you got to watch episode 4 to. No, if you don't want to keep watching after the first episode, then probably don't watch it, because like it's doing interesting and compelling things from the beginning, and getting you hooked on mysteries from the beginning, getting you invested in the characters from the beginning, and I think the horror element is, again, like, I don't think I thought Dr. Sleep was that scary. Like it was very effective at everything it was trying to do, and it wasn't really trying to make me, like, afraid to turn the lights off in my bedroom.
Sure.
But Midnight Mass was trying to make me afraid to turn the lights off in my bedroom, and it succeeded at that.
It definitely was.
So it's a very different sort of thing in that particular way.
Yeah. I can't recommend it enough. Really, probably the best thing I saw last year. And give it a shot, please. Don't listen to the conversation we're about to have if you haven't watched it yet.
Yeah, it'll be way more fun if you don't. Yeah,
it's the type of show, and I actually watched it very slowly. Normally I devour these Mike Flanagan things. Like, I think I watched Bly Manor, the sequel to Hill House. It's not even really a sequel. It's the same actors in telling a different story. But I watched that show in a weekend, that 10-episode series. So I watched 10 hours of TV in a weekend. I think Midnight Mass, my wife and I watched it over the course of like a week and a half, where we just watched one episode every so often, then took a break from it. And I really feel like that was the best way to do it, because, like, I needed time to digest some of the stuff in the episode.
I probably watched it a lot faster than that, but I don't disagree with your assertion that it's very, yeah, again, I think I can say this without spoilers. Like, it's very deep and surprisingly nuanced, and
yes,
like okay, so the themes that it trucks in, maybe you think like, oh, I've seen this before, I've seen stories explore these themes before. Yeah, and you have, because there's nothing new under the sun. But he definitely goes deeper and more interesting and takes angles that you haven't seen before, and I really appreciated it for its nuance and fairness in treating a lot of the stuff that it's getting into.
Sure.
Yeah.
So go watch it, and from this point on, we are going to spoil Midnight Mass. So spoilers for Midnight Mass will have a time code in the episode where we move on to other stuff. So if you don't want to listen to this part of the podcast and move on to other stuff, feel free. But this is your final warning: spoilers for Midnight Mass starting right now. Okay, so he made Salem's Lot, right? He made Salem's Lot, and that's the biggest surprise and the most delightful surprise of the whole thing to me, is that you're watching the show, and I think it's not until episode 4 where you fully are like, oh, it's just a vampire show, and then you go, wait a minute, it's just Salem's Lot, and I found it absolutely delightful that turn.
Like that's the fun thing, is it's. I hate to say this, Scott, but it's a better version of Salem's Lot, because
I don't think you're wrong.
Yeah, like it hits all of the core plot beats of that story that actually matter, and then it expands, and then it redefines, and then it refocuses, and it's the best Salem's Lot adaptation we're ever going to get. Put it that way.
And there is a Salem's Lot adaptation coming out next year, I believe. So, but I agree with you. I mean, the thing I love about it is because we take such a long time to slow roll the horror here and what is truly going on, we get to spend so much time with these central characters, right? We have Riley Flynn, our main character, who is a guy returning home after a stint in prison for being a drunk driver and accidentally killing a girl in an accident, which, when I'm talking about some of the most horrific moments in the show, I'm talking about the way Flanagan represents the constant presence of this woman he killed in his life. There's several moments, and the use of the flashing police lights that reflect off the glass that's in the corpse of the woman he killed, because she's like been impaled by shards of glass after the accident, and how the police lights are reflecting off that glass. The use of the camera tilt, where the camera will just like turn. Turn is not the right word. It like flip.
Lies on its side, right?
Yeah, it does. It lies on its side every time this woman's about to appear. And Flanagan uses this so effectively because he sets it up early in the first episode, and then we know from this point on that any moment where Riley's sitting in bed and then suddenly the camera lies on its side to match him, we're about to see a freaky ghost staring at him, representing this clear and present guilt that he feels. And like, this is the thing. This is not a real ghost. Like, he's not actually being haunted. That's not what the show is, but it's still terrifying.
Yeah. The first time it happens, it's a visceral shock, even though it's funny because I wouldn't even really classify it as a classic jump scare, because nothing's moving. It's just a cut to a shocking image that you're not expecting.
Yeah.
But then the thing is, the next time you see it, you're expecting it, but it's still so horrible that it affects you almost the same way. Like, he's just so aware of the way things are going to affect the viewer, and he does such like you said, the flashing red and blue lights, which kind of creep into the scene before you even see the image. It's just such a clever and powerful effect. And that's what we were talking about, I think, when we were saying, like, showing you what's going on in the mind of the characters using really innovative techniques.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's so important because it lays the groundwork for everything. Because what the show is, it is a vampire show, but what the show is a show exploring and examining the concept of faith and belief and religion. Obviously the title is Midnight Mass. This is not subtle. And I mean, it's interesting because Flanagan is a kid who was raised Roman Catholic, just like you and I were. He has since left that church, just like you and I have. And yet, the thing I love about this story is it's not anti-God, it's not anti-religion, it's not anti-spirituality. It's anti a very specific kind of belief system that watches as people use these things to justify or motivate monstrous, terrible behavior, and the way in which they can completely manipulate and transform and turn a group of people that, you know, are good, you know, kind, well-meaning people into a horrifying, monstrous mob of vampires.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, he really refuses to be simplistic. You know, the priest character, who, I mean, I think he's the most interesting character.
Oh, he's fantastic.
And, you know, incredibly well performed. It would be, you know, one way to do it is just be like, okay, he's evil, or another way would be like, okay, well, he's just a fool. It's really not so simple as either of those. Like, he's just a very flawed man.
Yeah.
You know, the closest thing that we have to sort of the monopole evil is the woman
Bev Keane,
who, and even she, you understand her.
Yeah.
Like what she's doing makes sense in her own mind, at least. And I mean, then there's also, you know, a vampire, but I think like smartly, the vampire is pretty backgrounded. I mean, that's okay. So I'll say, like, it's funny because this is not a criticism of the show, because I don't know how this show works without showing the vampire a whole bunch. But I think my favorite stuff was before the show shows the vampire, and it's just this shape in the darkness. You don't know what it is. You're actually very confused. It's like, is that, like, what the hell is going on? You know, you just see the eyes, the eyes in the darkness is like my favorite effect ever.
You're not wrong, but also a priest, a vampire, like a bat, like Nosferatu vampire in like a priest's like outfit, like the full on Roman Catholic, like Advent robe is like one of the most wonderful images I've ever seen on film. Like, it's just so fucking wild. And it, again, gets across exactly what I think Flanagan's trying to do. The absurdity of that image, the contradiction of that image, and how to our Hamish Linklater playing Father Paul is like, he doesn't question that at all. Like, it's just like, it's what I love about Paul is that it's not like he is absurdly convinced, Matt, that everything he's doing is the right thing to do, and everything he's doing is God's will, and he's genuinely and legitimately helping the people of this town by turning them into vampires that suck on blood and kill people and murder people. Like, he is totally bought into his convictions in a way that, like, when he the flashback moment where he tells the story of where he first came across the vampire, it's a nightmare scene. Yeah. It's a horror scene. And for someone to experience that and come away with, oh, this is God, this monstrous creature that looks like a gargoyle is how God is choosing to express his wants and desires to me.
Yeah,
is insane. Is insane.
It's insane, but also I just perversely loved how the show actually explains how, like, scripturally it's sort of credible that he could believe this, because he's like, everyone's encounter with an angel in the Bible is basically described with terror, and angels are actually kind of terrifying in their description. They never actually look like a person with wings. They look like monsters. And then also, you know, just on top of that, the fact that the whole vampire mythos is, you know, intentionally this perversion of, you know, the resurrection.
Yeah.
And then he, you know, the show takes advantage of that to say, this is the resurrection. This is the second coming. This is the eternal life that we were all promised. And like, that's just very clever. It's just a very clever thing to do.
It is. It really is. And I love it because, again, like, you know, we were both raised in this religion, and like, I don't, just because I'm not Catholic anymore doesn't mean like I hate Catholicism. I have a lot of very warm memories to what it was like growing up in the church, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and my family, my parents still are. And so like, it's not that I would like be personally offended by a show that like paints Catholicism in a bad light, because, you know, feel free, everyone. There's plenty of things to critique in this religion. But I love that Flanagan doesn't want to go easy here, right? Like, he has the Riley character be the atheist who, you know, has given up on the existence of God, has decided that there's too much terrible stuff in this world for there to be God, and he's coming in contact with these people that believe genuinely, like in Father Paul, and also in his former girlfriend Erin Green, who legitimately believes in God as well, and of course in a very different way than the father does. But I mean, even the conversations between Father Paul and Riley in the early parts of the story, it's not as if the show paints this as Riley is correct and the father, aka the bad guy in the story, is just wrong about everything. Like, they're legitimate, you know, cerebral debates about the value of religion and spirituality and belief, and the flaws in those things too. Like, it's almost as if Flanagan is having an internal conversation with himself about what he feels about these things, and it's conflicted, and
Yeah.
not, and there's no definite answer here. There's no, it's just I don't know, I'm confused, I'm uncertain, and I'm dealing with that by having these two characters kind of spar against each other in this conversation.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, that's to me, that's my favorite kind of storytelling in general, mm-hmm. is where you have a thesis about which the author is genuinely conflicted and expresses that conflict through the characters, and they themselves are not necessarily even sure how things are going to fall out, and maybe the way things fall out is ambiguous, and you're left with the pieces of the puzzle to try to think about on your own, which is always very rewarding.
Yeah. And it's not to say that the show is not critical about these things. I mean, like, one of the final images of the show is these vampire people like chanting psalms as they're hunting people, you know, like it's incredibly terrifying how the sheer number of people in this community are just completely bought into the resurrection of vampireness and the consuming of their fellow people to survive. It's horrifying.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to critique there in the way religion operates sometimes.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the interesting things that maybe I haven't even fully unpacked yet, but you know, it's hard to be the perspective of the atheist character when you're in a story where you have just been turned into a vampire.
Sure.
Like, obviously supernatural stuff exists, and then you've got this priest telling you have been resurrected. This is your afterlife. This is your eternal life now. You know, this is what we were promised in the scripture. And then even then, you know, he's in the position of having to say, okay, you know, yeah, I guess you did just bring me back to life, but that doesn't mean that what you're saying is actually the truth still. I think that's a fun way of doing that critique, because he's right. I mean, it's an evil vampire. It's not a boon from God.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, even in a world where supernatural things are real, your scriptural, priestly description of your interpretation of what's happening around you is not necessarily the accurate one, or the one that people should listen to. And yes, as you say, he leads everyone into nightmarish, horrible acts, and then death, basically, pretty much everyone.
But I think the interesting thing to me is that Flanagan is almost more blaming, like, he's blaming the power of religion to do these things more than he's blaming the individuals. Like, mm-hmm. I'm thinking about the mayor of the town and his family, right? Who go on this full killing spree for a brief moment and then manage to come back from it at the end, because everyone kind of comes back from it at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's interesting because, like, they were hoodwinked, they were kind of manipulated into doing these things, but I don't think the show blames them for it necessarily, because it's willing to kind of forgive them at the very, very end. And like, there's some really understandable stuff here where like your daughter is in a wheelchair and you desperately want to get her out of there in any way possible. And then someone comes along, a voice of God, does the revival tent, magic cure thing. And suddenly she's walking again, Of course you'd buy into that, right? Of course you would believe in that moment. And then tells you, well, if you don't do this, you're going to lose her again. It's like, well, okay. Obviously I'm going to do that thing.
Yeah. And you've been brought up in this structure where you're just supposed to believe what the man wearing the collar says.
Right. Which is, I think, the biggest and most critical criticism that Flanagan has of maybe Catholicism specifically is the way in which in Catholicism, the priest is elevated to a level above the parishioners. And it is that way in which the priest can abuse their power to manipulate and hurt people, which has happened in real life. And it definitely happens in the story.
Yeah. Main difference here is, I mean, this guy really thinks he's doing the right thing. And in a way that you empathize with, even as you are like, no.
Yeah. I mean, look, and I'm trying to think of a way to phrase this, which it doesn't look like I'm defending priests, because I'm certainly not. My mom worked in our church for 20 years. The church I grew up in, she worked there. And when all the stuff with the Catholic Church and the terrible sexual abuse scandals and everything was breaking, my mom sat there and listened to some of the priests in my church not justify it, but kind of explain it away because they were priests, right? That because it's a priest. He's a priest, he's elevated, he's above, he's better. How can we, or you rather, he's saying you because he's a priest too. How can you, the lower class of people, judge this man for the things he's done? It's wild and disturbing and terrible. And you hear stuff like that. And then I watch stuff like this and I'm like, yep, I see that. I see this attitude. And I think Flanagan sees it as well. And it's a terrible, horrible, destructing attitude. Yeah. And by the way, matches nothing that anything that Jesus ever talked about or wrote about. This whole hierarchical structure that someone decided to make up is just random bullshit.
Yeah. Well, to me, it also strikes me as a sort of terrible, evil perversion of this idea where the church, one of its main messages is forgiveness. But if you're going to be a monster, and then turn around and say, you're supposed to forgive.
Yep.
Like, okay, well now you've crossed a line where it's like, you know what? Deep in my heart, I will forgive you. But I'm also going to put you under the prison for the rest of your life. And they try to weasel out of it and have it both ways. And it's it's like, hey, that's not, that's not what, like you're not dumb. Like, I'm speaking to the imaginary priest here. Like you know what you're doing.
Yeah, you have to know better than that. Yeah. But I think they legitimately believe these things, and that's perhaps the most disturbing thing about it.
Yeah, right. They can contort themselves into believing what they're obligated to believe, which is again, that's the problem. That's the whole problem.
Yep.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you about some of the most shocking moments of this series, though, because I can't remember what episode it was. Perhaps it was episode 5, where our main character, Riley Flynn, is turned into a vampire. And Flanagan allows the scene to play out over the course of minutes, but what feel like hours, where he's meeting up with Aaron Green, and we're not sure if he's going to eat her.
Yeah.
Like,
is he going to try to turn her?
Yeah.
We think maybe like it's intentional. It's so funny that you mentioned this, because this is exactly the scene I wanted to talk about next. Because it's kept ambiguous, where you don't really know what the conclusion of his conversation with the priest was. And he takes her out on the boat, and you're like,
now he's got her alone.
He's got her alone. She can't get away. And yeah, you go on, Scott.
Well, no, then the sun comes up, and then we see him combust, and it is this incredibly powerful moment of build of tension and then release in this moment of it's fascinating because you simultaneously feel relief because you're like, oh, thank God, Riley, you didn't hurt this woman.
Mm-hmm.
But like almost following that relief is, oh, he died. Like it's just like, like you just killed off your main character in episode 5 of 7. And it's just, it's an incredibly shocking choice. And it is exactly what the story needs. I love how like he almost becomes a Jesus for the salvation of the people that are going to survive this thing, which does anyone survive? Hold on. Does anyone survive this?
The two kids.
Yes, you're right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but like everything about it is microscopically perfect. Like him taking her out on the boat and like he looks up at the sky and like the sky is like beautiful to him. And it's just like this beautiful moment. And you're still not sure, like, is he talking her up to the idea so that he can turn her? And you know, we've had this conversation actually ever since Salem's Lot. What would it take to convince someone that vampires are real? If you know vampires are real because you just saw something impossible. You go tell your friend, I need your help. Go get a steak and a crucifix and some garlic. We're going to go kill vampires. What can you say to convince your friend that you're not crazy? And the answer that the show gives you is there's nothing you can say. What you do is you show them something impossible.
Yeah.
Even if it costs you your life and there's, you know, that's all he could do. That's all he could think to do, you know. And
importantly, like crazy stuff has already happened in the town at this point, right? Like like Kate Siegel has lost her baby, but not in a normal miscarriage way, in that the baby is just gone as if she was never pregnant in the first place. And then also all of the old people in the town are miraculously starting to get younger in a way that doesn't make sense. So she's already kind of like primed to believe crazy shit. And yet still, you're absolutely right that she would not have bought a second of this if not for Riley's choice to show her. It's so effective. And I will say the only thing about the show that doesn't work on me is because Mike Flanagan uses this stable of actors that I recognize, you can tell immediately that they're in old age makeup, and your immediate conclusion to that as a savvy television watcher is, oh, we're going to de-age them in some way. And that's the only thing that doesn't work for me. Like I love Henry Thomas as Riley's father. He's a great actor and he's in basically every single Flanagan thing. And you look at him and you're like, oh, you're in old age makeup. So we're obviously going to do some reverse aging thing here, which is a bit of a bummer. I wish it was a bit more of a surprise. And the same thing with the OBGYN's mother, who is just clearly in old age makeup as well.
Well, thank God I'm too stupid to notice these things.
Oh, you didn't notice that they were in old age makeup? Oh,
well, I think I noticed the OBGYN's mother was. I didn't notice the other people were. I just figured that they were, you know, schlubby old actors.
Theirs is much less. I think the OBGYN's mother is much more dramatic. She's much older and in much worse health than some of the other people.
But I just sort of explained that away as being like, it's pretty hard to hire like a 90-year-old actor.
Sure.
And so just hire a younger actor and put them in makeup. But then no, they flipped it. Obviously she de-ages. So you know, you brought up this, you know, super shocking moment in like episode 5 of 7. But I think one thing that's great about the show is it's great television because every episode has something roughly as shocking and interesting and just keeps you moving along. You know, the scene where the priest dies, and then he wakes up and he's a vampire. Like maybe, you know, it's easy to kind of forget what you knew when, but like you don't know that this is a vampire show yet at that point. And so he just like dies and you're like, what the hell? He's dead. And then he comes back to life, and then he's, you know, you see that he's like sensitive to the sun, and you're like, okay, well, I get it now. But like that's how you find out it's vampires. Like you find out it's vampires after that point. Or at least I did. Like I was open-minded to it being, you know, possibly other things. And so that's just an example of like really quite a well-paced with a lot of these really great, shocking, dramatic, twisty moments.
Yeah, I mean, we talked briefly about how I think Hill House uses the episodic format in its full glory to make each individual episode matter in very distinct ways. I do think Midnight Mass is much more of a traditional binge model show where episodes aren't exactly distinct in that they don't have their own distinct theming and moments. But I do think that there are very natural builds where I feel like at the end of every single episode, there is a moment that twists and turns and changes what must happen from here on out. It's very much a show that every time you think you have it in your head of what's the show going to be and where we're going, it seems to zig instead of zag.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
it's not one that feels manipulative. It's not one that feels like I'm doing it specifically because I think that surprising people is the only reason people watch TV anymore. It's just, you thought that the show was doing something and you were wrong about it. And the thing that it does is always actually just the more interesting thing to do. And you just didn't realize that because you're either, too wound up in the way stories are traditionally told, the way these kind of stories are traditionally told. And so you just make assumptions about how that's going to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I think that's the really savvy storyteller knows all the tropes that they're, that you're going to be jumping to. And that's how they subvert you without quite, without throwing you off entirely, because there's that would be frustrating. The show doesn't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this is a show, Matt, like we've been talking for a while and I want to talk more. You and I want to do something different in the future with content creation. And one of the things we want to do and one of the trial runs we want to do it on is this show, because we really feel like there's enough here to really dive into this thing in a whole lot of detail. We've really only scratched the surface of what's going on here, and really diving into each individual moment, each individual monologue, each individual camera move. Like, I think there would be a really fascinating conversation on how Flanagan films these monologues, right? Because, monologues are great and characters delivering just crisp, wonderful written, emotional dialogue is wonderful. But film is a visual medium. And so it's not enough to just stick someone in the middle of frame and have them recite this wonderful speech you wrote. You've got to do something with it. And I think the things that Flanagan is doing with the camera while these monologues are being recited help elevate them to all-time great moments in television.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I was thinking about that, and it was the sort of thing actually where I was so into the scenes that I wasn't actually paying a ton of attention to what the camera's doing during the monologues.
Yeah.
But and that's actually why I'd like to revisit it and study it, because that's the funny thing about a movie that you really love, is that very often you're less aware of the techniques that it's using because you're wrapped up in what's happening.
Yeah. I find that in moments like this where I'm just really enjoying this thing, and to be honest with you, like it's been a while since I watched this, and I was not watching it thinking I was going to have to talk about it on a podcast one day. So like I was not paying attention, because there are moments where I feel like if I'm watching something for a podcast, I have to force myself to take a step back and take a step out of the thing and start observing the thing from a technical level. And I just never wanted to do that with the show because I was just in it. I was just so in it. But I think there's room to do that. And I really do want to do that eventually.
Yeah, me too.
I think we're done with Midnight Mass, though, right? So, End of spoilers for Midnight Mass.
End of spoilers.
Oh, before we say end of spoilers, Raul Coley, who played Sheriff Hassan, who we did not talk about at all in that discussion, is fucking fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the best parts of the show, I think. Yeah,
he's so good, and like the ideas around, like this is a show that's primarily focused on Christianity, on Catholicism, but not all, right? Like it is exploring the idea of, well, there are other religions with other beliefs, and let's explore that as well. Let's explore the way these religions cause us to other religions, and also the way we reject those religions in similar ways, that we are the same underneath all of this. Yeah,
it does a remarkably good job weaving in all those different threads and making them feel like they've been given proper airtime, even though that's kind of a heavy lift.
Yeah, definitely. All right. That's Midnight Mass, and that's Mr. Mike Flanagan, who I think we both very much love. I think we made that really clear. So just so you know, Matt, Mike Flanagan is still making things. He's not done. The next thing he is making another Netflix television show based loosely on the Edgar Allan Poe story, The Fall of the House of Usher, which is just very exciting, just extremely exciting.
Yeah. I can't wait for that. That's really, really cool.
And it has his entire, usual cast of characters. Like he's basically, he's picking up this like group of characters as he's going and actors as he's going, and everything he does, he gets a new one. Like he hadn't worked with Raul Coley before. He worked with him at Midnight Mass, and guess who's going to be in House of Usher now? Boom. Also, the guy Robert Longstreet, who played the poor drunk man in Midnight Mass, who accidentally hurt the mayor's daughter. He's in it now. Samantha Sloyan, who played Bev Keane, she's in, like his stable is getting. Zach Gilford, who played Riley, is in Fall of the House of Usher. It's growing, and that's very exciting.
Yeah. Man, that's awesome. He's just showing all of these actors as they show up how much fun they're going to have together, and then they just tag along.
Oh, also Mark Hamill's in it.
What?
So that's very, very exciting. I don't know exactly when that's coming. They're in the middle of filming right now, I believe. It says 2022. I don't think that's true. I don't think it's coming out this year, but we'll see.
We'll see. The
other thing he's working on, I believe, is it's a show called The Midnight Club.
Okay.
Scary Stories. Zach Gilford's in it. Samantha Sloyan's in it. Oh gosh, he's really out of control with this. I think he's only directing 2 episodes himself. I don't know when this comes out. I haven't heard a lot about this, but it's also on Netflix. I think he's just got like a creative deal with Netflix where TV wise, anything he does is going to them.
Yeah.
But I just, man, Matt, watch Hill House. Do me a favor. Go watch Hill House. Just watch it during the day so you don't get too spookied. But
okay. Sounds good.
So that's Mike Flanagan. Can't wait to see what he has next. I'm so excited for everything he does.
Me too.
He should adapt The Dark Tower.
He's 100%. He should adapt The Dark Tower.
Yeah.
Doof.
All right, Matt. Let's move on and talk about the latest Disney Pixar film, Turning Red. You watched this movie, sort of. You said, kind of.
Well, one of those phenomena where the kids really want to watch it. It's on the TV. I'm having to cook dinner and take care of kids and do things.
Sure.
And then that phenomenon happened twice, and so I saw different parts of it on both of those semi viewings. So that's just context for like the incompleteness of my impression.
Fair.
But you have seen it as well, yes?
I did watch this. I watched this. I think the weekend it came out, which is a couple weekends ago, because it's another thing that's on Disney Plus, and so it's very easy to just boot that up and watch it. I quite enjoyed this movie, Matt. I really like what Pixar has been doing lately with Soul and Luca, and now Turning Red. It seems like they're getting into this period where they're wanting to tell very specific stories about very specific experiences. I think early, like Toy Story is a great movie, but it's trying to be very broad, right? Like it's intentionally being like very broad and mass appeal-y. And it's not that Turning Red is not a thing that is mass appeal-y, but it is telling this very specific story of an Asian Canadian kid, 13 years old, living in Vancouver, I believe, or is it Toronto? I can't remember. It doesn't matter. A city in Canada. Uh-huh. And her experiences in life, her experiences, she turns into a panda bear, and that's a metaphor, Matt. It's a metaphor for getting your period. Uh-huh. It's turning red. It's not subtle, but they even make a direct joke in the movie about how her mom assumes she's got her period for the first time. But it's about growing up, and it's about finding who you are, and how who you are and who your parents want you to be, and those struggles, which is very direct and specific to this character in this location at this time. It's set, I think it's set in the early 2000s, right? So it's technically a period piece.
Interesting. I didn't pick up on that, actually. That's funny. There's probably a lot I didn't pick up on. Yeah, no, I mean, it's very funny. Like, I was laughing pretty much the whole time that I was watching the movie. I mean, it's funny because watching it with my kids, like, I'm laughing at stuff that they're not laughing at. And it's because, like, I'm getting the humor on the level of like, oh man, like this is a teenager thing. This is how teenagers are, teenagers and their parents, thinking about me and my parents, maybe thinking about what my kids are going to be like when they're older. And my kids are just like, they're, the oldest of them isn't even 10 yet. So they're not getting that humor, but then there's also plenty of humor, more aimed at them.
Yeah.
And just, there's a lot of like just delightful absurdity in the movie, especially toward the end. I guess I say that because that's mainly what I watched, actually. But just like this just sort of what you might also almost call situational comedy. But no, it's very, very funny, very energetic. Just, yeah, really, really good show.
Yeah, I liked it a lot. I didn't love it, and I've been trying to kind of figure out maybe why I didn't love it. What is it about it? And one of the things I latched onto was that energy. It is a relentless movie that moves constantly and quickly. And I think this is honestly just a generational thing. Like, I think this is something I've been noticing, especially in animated features of the last few years. Like, you look at Mitchell's vs. the Machines, which is a movie I really liked. You look at even Into the Spider-Verse, these are movies with a pace to them that is just like throwing images at your face as fast as possible. And I think this is just like the generation, in front of us, or I don't know, with the younger generation just consumes media like this constantly. And so they're used to this kind of kinetic, like constant energy that I'm perhaps not as used to. The other thing that I think the reason I didn't love it is I didn't even realize this. I was trying to put my finger on it, and someone said, I was listening to people talk about this movie and was like, it's obviously very heavily inspired by anime. And I was like, yes, that's why I don't like it as much. That's what's keeping me from loving this movie, is it's super fucking anime. And it certainly is, right?
It's your kryptonite. It's amazing you liked it as much as you did.
I know. That speaks to the quality of it, for sure.
Exactly. As for the sort of frantic delivery, I just wonder, as a matter of curiosity, like how much of that is that this is what the current generation is used to and wants, versus just, this is now what animators can do,
Sure.
Like think back to Toy Story, like the effort required to animate, a cowboy tipping his hat was, pretty extensive. Now you can just like do so much more stuff, and it looks great. They've just got workflows for nailing all this stuff in. They can try it a bunch of different ways and see which one is the best. And, you iterate upon the tipping of the hat 100 times instead of just like, okay, we got one shot at this because it costs $10 million to render 1 minute of whatever. And so like, I think maybe we're entering into an interesting space in animation where a lot of stuff is being tried that could never be tried before. And I don't actually know if that means, animation is going to be like this from now on. I think it might actually be, we're in a phase of experimentation. Maybe films will retract back from that as people realize like that's a little bit overwhelming, and maybe people don't actually like it. I could be wrong, it could be entirely wrong. It could be the animation is totally trending in that direction. But my feeling is that I don't think it is, actually. I think this is I want to say fad, because it makes it seem like these movies aren't, good and artistically relevant. They are, but I think it's a zigzag on the path of movie tech.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there. I mean, I think Into the Spider-Verse, the things that movie did were things that animation has never done before in ways that are really, really exciting. And I think, I don't know, God, the thing about these movies is the lag time is so long. Like, it takes such a long time to make these movies that I don't know if a lot of what Turning Red was doing was done post Into the Spider-Verse or not. It feels like some of it certainly was. Like, the exciting thing is, like, if you talk to Pixar animators, they look at like the things that Sony Animation is doing in both Mitchell's vs. the Machines and the Spider-Verse, and are like, oh my God, we want to do that here. And I do think Turning Red is like the first example of Pixar getting to kind of stretch their legs and do that kind of thing and do it. Like, I think the Disney Pixar animation style is very set in stone to its detriment sometime. You know, like the design of characters is similar across the board. Like the way faces look, the way they do those things is very similar in a lot of these movies. And I'm hoping that the existence of these other movies that, yes, have these kinetic paces and this wild out there stuff is getting to allow these Pixar animators to do some new, different stuff.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I don't know if this is fair or true or whatever, but like I'm thinking about, you know, we just had this conversation about Midnight Mass, which is a, you know, ponderous that's not entirely fair, but like you compare it to the visual spectacle of something like Turning Red, and it's like a lot of, you know, either static shot or, you know, the camera is moving around very slowly.
Sure.
And you know, you're letting the tone build slowly. And I thought back about this, like specific scenes in Finding Nemo, which are like the dramatic linchpin of Finding Nemo, where it's basically Marlin, the clownfish, and Dory, the whatever she is fish. And they're in just basically a blank, you know, dimly lit greenish ocean expanse. And they're having an extremely dramatic back and forth. And it's like, yeah, steady shots, few cuts, nothing happening in the background, very muted lighting, very muted colors. Even though this is a very bright movie, the scene has very muted colors. And It's like you have to have the discipline in storytelling to pull back when you need to pull back. And I think it's one of the things that I've noticed about a lot of these newer movies is like they're so, even in the moments that are dramatic, they're so visually spectacular. And I'm including movies that I really like in this statement. They're so visually overwhelmingly beautiful that you're not actually as caught up in the emotion as you could otherwise be.
Yeah, I like that. And that's the moment where I wonder, is this a generational thing? Like, are younger folks able to emotionally connect to those things on a level that maybe I'm not, because I'm used to a much more muted, slower pace of storytelling? I don't know. I don't know. And I'm not saying, look, I think to be clear, I'm not saying that's inherently a bad thing, right? Like, it's not. Obviously, your children absolutely adored this movie. People really, really, really like this movie. And I liked it a whole lot too. But like, that was my main observation, that like there were moments where like, oh my God, like 30,000 things are happening at once. And we move from thing to thing to thing to thing. And it feels like the movie's just sprinting and I'm struggling to keep up with it at times.
Yeah, we're just old. That's all.
Yeah, we're just old. That's all it is. That's all it is. I think most importantly, though, the thing about this that I find most interesting is that this movie's on Disney Plus, which is not a bad thing. I watched it because it's on Disney Plus, but we're moving back to a place where we're starting to, you know, put movies back in the movie theater again. WB had this whole thing last year where everything was on HBO Max. They're not doing that this year. All their movies are going directly to the theater. And Disney, for the most part, is putting all its things directly in the theater, except Pixar. This is the third Pixar film that has showed up exclusively on Disney Plus. No theatrical release. No even like Disney premiere thing. Just dumped on Disney Plus. And I know that Pixar, the people that work at Pixar, are not happy about this. They've kind of, you know, as outspoken as they're able to be without, you know, ruining their careers, they have expressed displeasure in how Disney is managing Pixar and why are we not getting these full-blown theatrical releases and runs and things like that. It's interesting that Disney's making this choice. Do you have any thoughts about like why they would be doing that?
Well, I mean, the first pass thought is just they know that everybody loves Pixar. Pixar is an incredibly strong brand, probably stronger than Disney itself in some regards, I would say, at least amongst some people.
Sure.
And so they probably are thinking, hey, people love Pixar. Let's just make it so that if you want to watch Pixar, you have to sign up for Disney Plus. So they're using it as a carrot to get people who might not otherwise to sign up for Disney Plus. And that's honestly all I can think of in terms of a reason. I mean, you can get really galaxy brain, and you can think like, well, they don't want multiple movies from their own studio competing for the same box office dollars in the theater or something like that. But I don't really think that fully makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think ultimately it's more about funneling people into Disney Plus, because I think they see the future as being everything is Disney Plus. Everything is hubbed around Disney Plus.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, what it means, I guess, is that like they made a calculus, and they decided that it is more beneficial for us to use this as a Disney Plus selling point than it is to say this could garner us a lot of box office money if we drop it in theaters. Like they obviously decided it's better financially for us to put this on Disney Plus to attempt to bolster Disney Plus subscriptions than it is to do the theatrical thing.
Right. I mean, if that's true, it's shocking actually, because it suggests that they stand to make so much money on Disney Plus that they can just afford to just write off an entire box office release or three.
That's the thing, is I'm not even clear how they made that financial calculus. I mean, obviously they have the numbers, right? They know how many people are watching these things on their service, and we don't. But I don't know. Like even if this thing underperforms, you have to think it's a $500 million like movie worldwide box office. Like certainly a company like Disney is not going to leave money on the table. That's just not how they operate. That's not how they were allowed to become this big monstrous behemoth of a company. But like they're giving up box office receipts on this stuff, and obviously it costs money to release a movie into theaters. Like that is not a free thing. It's going to cost them money to do that. But so they're saying that it's not worth that cost, basically.
Yeah. I mean, it could be it could be a mistake, like it could just be a mistake.
Sure.
Like I mean, I say that because you point out like they're this corporate behemoth, but like we just watched Zillow literally destroy billions of dollars of value because they didn't understand what the hell they were doing. So like it's possible that this is a new area. There's no such thing as an expert in this, right? This is a new thing. We're muddling our way through it in the dark as a species. So maybe in retrospect, it'll be like, no, Jesus, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you release a beautiful Pixar movie in the theaters where families are going to want to go see it? Yeah, I don't know. I'm very curious to see, as I've said many times, how this continues to evolve over time, because it's not like, we've figured it out and things are just kind of going to be status quo. Things are just constantly changing.
Yeah. I don't know. Disney, of course, is not immune to making mistakes as well, right? Mm-hmm. I think they're in the middle of a controversy of their own making now, just because there's this terrible law going down in Florida, and I think people have vocally been asking Disney to speak out against it because they have that big, huge park down in Florida, and the CEO of Disney was just like, "This is not our place to say anything about this," and that is not the thing that's going to win you points in 2022.
Not playing well.
Unforced error by Disney there. So yeah, they make mistakes all the time, and perhaps this will be one. I mean, the thing that is very clear is that they are running numbers on this, because it's not like they've made a universal Pixar thing, because the Pixar film Lightyear, the Buzz Lightyear origin story movie that is coming, I think later this year, will be released exclusively in theaters. So they obviously are making calculations and think like Lightyear will definitely be a huge smash hit. It's worth it. Turning Red, probably not. Which is I mean, it's kind of a bummer, because you're telling the staff of your company that their movie is inherently less valuable, which is not a fun thing to be told.
No, it's not great. Yeah, I don't know how to think about it, really.
I don't know either. Maybe we'll find out. We'll see how Lightyear does in the theater, and see if that changes their tune about these other. Because I love the idea that Pixar is getting to tell these smaller stories about these people that stories haven't been told about as much. I love this, and it's sad to think that they're doing this, but also it's not big enough to put in the theater. It's not an event thing, even if it's numerically just the truth. It's still kind of a bummer.
It is. again, I can't help but wonder if this is a thing that will go away once, there, I don't know, quote unquote, things go back to normal.
Sure.
Let me phrase it. Just say, in 2 to 3 years, it'll just be like, of course, why wouldn't you release every movie in theaters?
Yeah.
Why would you do anything other than that?
Sure. That's very possible. Very possible. All right, Matt, one final thing I wanted to talk to you about before we go for the week. The Oscars are this weekend. They are on Sunday night. And when you and I last talked about the Oscars, we talked about the fact that I think the nominations had just come out, right? And we were talking about what does the Academy do? Their ratings last year were the lowest they have ever been, and things are not looking good for this year. What do they do? And one of the things we talked about was maybe they should lean into the niche thing. They should lean into the fact that only a very small segment of the population is ever going to care about who wins the Academy Awards anymore. Movies are not the dominant cultural force in this country or this world anymore, and therefore the movie awards are just not the dominant cultural force they are anymore, and there's no way of getting that back. And we said with the nominations, the way they were, it seemed like they were perhaps starting to lead into that idea that we're not going to nominate Spider-Man. We're going to do these niche films that very few people have seen. And we're just going to live with it being a small thing. And that's fine. And then they did a whole bunch of stuff since then that seems to directly contradict that idea.
Yeah, you're going to have to explain this in detail because I'm only tangentially aware.
So one of the first things they announced is that the broadcast will not be handing out awards for 8 categories on the live broadcast. So 8 categories will be getting their awards before the live broadcast starts. It will still be in the theater. It will still be in front of the crowd, but it will not be on TV. And then they'll do like an edited, packaged version of those awards, like to speed up and go through them. So those 8 categories are documentary short, makeup and hairstyling, original score, production design, animated short, live action short, sound, and film editing. Editing. This was not a popular choice amongst the people that watch the Academy Awards. And this is one of those things, Matt, where this seems like a thing where like, well, normal people don't give a shit about, shorts and sound and score and editing because they don't know what those things mean. Normal people want to see the actors and the best picture, right? So that's the stuff we'll put in the show. But it's like, but people aren't watching, like the people that think that aren't watching the Academy Awards anymore. Mm-hmm. So I just think it's I think this is the problem the Academy's having is, first of all, it's a big body with thousands of members, and so they can't make decisions unilaterally. And so you have on one side, you have the Academy as a large body choosing collectively to nominate films that are more niche and to head towards this more niche type of thing. And then also you have the Academy Awards as like the committee that is deciding things say, no, we're going to take 8 films out of or 8 awards out of the main broadcast because those are clearly the unimportant ones. You're broadcasting to everyone that these are the 8 less important awards, and it's just doing it's contradicting the idea of we should make this more niche and more specific to film obsessives that are watching us already.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems to be this compromise, worst of all worlds type thing where everybody's complaints are being heard, and thus the change is in a direction that makes no one happy. Instead of just picking one group to make happy and saying like, I'm sorry, the rest of you, this isn't for you anymore because either because you're not watching anyway, or because on the flip side, because we want this thing to be relevant and not a niche industry show that isn't even televised.
I don't think there's anyone out there that's not watching the Academy Awards because it's long. I just don't. Yeah. I don't like people watch the Super Bowl all the time, and that's like 5 hours long. Like people, like if you're into it, if it becomes an event thing, you will watch it. I don't think a person exists that says, "Oh, thank God, we're not going to have to see the makeup and hairstyling award. Now I will watch." Right. Like I just don't think that person exists.
Yeah, I mean, it was always fun when I was a kid. We'd watch it every year. And then I fell out of the habit. And then to my where I'm sitting and where I am in my life, the reason I don't watch it now is it's like it doesn't seem compelling to me anymore. And I don't know why that is exactly.
Because it doesn't matter who wins Best Picture anymore.
Because it doesn't matter because
the film that's going to win Best Picture is a film called The Power of the Dog, which you've never heard of and probably don't know anything about. And
yeah, that's true. I feel like, when I was a kid and I would watch it, I kind of always had a dog in the fight. Like I always wanted this particular movie to win, even if it was a little bit irrational, because it's like, well, I hadn't seen the other ones. I wanted my movie to win that I liked.
Mm-hmm.
And now I think you're right that like the movies that have been winning in recent years have been ones that just nobody really cared about.
Very good movies, by the way. I liked Power of the Dog. I loved Parasite. Like good movies, but yeah, not those core cultural films.
Right. Like I remember like Gladiator winning awards, and it's like, of course, Gladiator is going to win the awards, right? And,
yeah.
and that now you don't feel like you can say that anymore. You feel like just because everybody loved this movie and it was great and it was a piece of art, the Academy is just gonna pull a fast one on you because oh well, you're just not subtle and artistic enough to appreciate.
And this is what I think actually starting to pull awards out of the main broadcast hurts your show, because one of the cool things is you have a movie like Mad Max Fury Road, which did not win any of the big awards, right? But the wonderful thing about Mad Max Fury Road is that year's Oscars, it was winning every single technical category. It was winning, like makeup and hairstyling, production design, like all these things that they've pulled out of the main show now. It just kept winning and winning and winning and winning and winning. And there was this real movement that you felt while watching the broadcast of like, okay, I don't think it's going to win the big awards, but isn't this awesome? Like that people like that suddenly this movie just keeps winning and winning and winning and winning. And by cutting these awards out of this, you're kind of killing that narrative that a film could potentially go under, that is never going to compete on the level of Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actors, whatever, but is a wonderful movie that is so technically impressive that everyone in those technical sectors have to pay attention to it. And then so you get this thing where it might not be the winner of the night, but like everyone's talking about how everyone kept saying Mad Max Fury Road all night. And by carving all that out, you lose that in the broadcast.
Right. Well, you also lose, for those years when there's a wider variety of movies that do well, the Oscars are more of a celebration of film and all of the cool stuff that came out this year.
Yeah.
And when you pare it down further and further, then it just becomes the Academy saying these are the handful of movies that have our imprimatur this year. You're welcome, everyone.
And also, score is incredibly important to film. How could you say that score is one of the less important things?
And it's something people do care about. Like a lot of people care about music. A lot of people like music.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty much everybody likes music. Yeah. It's silly. It's stupid.
Yeah. You want to know what the other thing the Oscars did that was hilarious and seems to be out of touch with the idea that they should probably be going for this niche idea?
What?
They decided that they were going to release a hashtag on Twitter to allow people on the internet to vote for their fan favorite film of the year. Mm-hmm. So their fan favorite movie of 2021, and that they were going to, at the ceremony that they just have said is too long and we can't show 8 awards, we're going to have a special moment where we honor the fan favorite film of the year. They did this thing and they forgot that the internet is the internet.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to know which movie was the most hashtagged movie of 2021?
Is it Bodie McBoatface?
No. I mean, there's only certain movies that are eligible. Okay. So it was Zack Snyder's Army of the Dead. Because
that was a mistake.
Because they said specifically that Justice League was not eligible, Zack Snyder's Justice League. So all the Snyder Bros decided that they were going to get together and elevate his movie that came out this year,
Makes
Army of the Dead.
Perfect sense. Yep.
So I don't know, and I think before that there was like all the Johnny Depp like stands, because there's like a huge Johnny Depp fandom around the world. Like he had a movie that came out this year that like no one has seen, but they just voted for it because Johnny Depp. there's like, what the internet does with whenever you do these things, right? The internet is going to like mass this great number of people obsessed about certain things to band together to do something ridiculous. And the question is, are the Academy Awards really gonna are they really gonna take 5 minutes out of the broadcast to honor Zack Snyder's Army of the Dead? Like, that's ridiculous. Like, here's what they did, Matt. They didn't nominate Spider-Man. Like, everyone wanted them to nominate Spider-Man No Way Home. And so they thought that if they did this Twitter thing, that everyone would tweet about Spider-Man No Way Home, and then they could kind of have their cake and eat it too. But they forgot that the internet is the internet.
Yeah.
And this is the second time the Academy has made assumptions like this that blew up in their face. Like, remember last year when they thought it would be great to change the order of stuff around so that the final award of the night would be giving Chadwick Boseman his posthumous Oscar for Best Actor, and then he didn't win, and it was the most awkward thing in the world. Well, I think they've done it again, where they tried to craft this moment where they got to honor the Spider-Man movie that everyone loved and wanted them to nominate for Best Picture. And now they have to talk about Zack Snyder's Army of the Dead.
Yeah. I mean, this strikes me as the situation where like everyone on the inside knows that the company is sinking and the leadership is bailing out. And so it's left with like basically a lack of direction, a lack of leadership, because there is in fact no way out of it. And so they're just, you've got a few people riding the ship all the way down.
Yeah, it seems like that. I don't know. It's interesting because, like I said last time, the Academy has a lot of money. Like, it's not like it's going to cease to exist as an organization anytime soon. So they're not like worried about that. But as it is right now and remains right now, I think it has to change, because we'll see what the ratings are on Sunday night. I suspect it's going to be very, very bad.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. Who cares if they exist as an organization if no one watches them? They're not relevant.
Sure.
And your average person can't even name who the Best Picture winner was for the year.
Sure. Yeah. Oh boy. So we'll find out on Sunday exactly how bad everything is. And I think that's it for us this week, Matt. It was kind of a potpourri episode here.
Yeah. Those happen sometimes. Mm-hmm. It's natural.
But we want to hear from you folks. So if you have any opinions on Mike Flanagan and any of his creative endeavors, if you have opinion on Turning Red and Pixar and Disney's decision to not let Pixar be in movies, or if you have any opinions on the Oscars and what ends up winning. I mean, this time next week, we'll know what won Best Picture. If it was Power of the Dog, we'll see. But you can always reach out to us via email at doofmedia@gmail.com, on Twitter @doofmedia, and over on our subreddit, that's r/doofmedia.
Yeah, and if you are not already subscribed to the Doofcast, we encourage you to subscribe and ensure you never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else podcasts can be found.
And if you like what we do here and want to support us, consider becoming a patron of Doof Media. You can head on over to patreon.com/doofmedia, donate at the $10 level, get access to our other levels of the tower, in which we talked about Dr. Sleep in way more detail than we talked about it today. And of course, you would be helping us out, supporting us, keeping our lights on, and getting a bunch of other cool stuff, because next week, I believe, is when we're doing our monthly Doof Canon episode, where we decide if a movie is worthy of getting into our illustrious canon of great films. And it's our patrons who help us decide what movie is going to be nominated for that. So you get to be part of that vote as well.
Yeah. Also, please consider rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, because each review helps us get more exposure and introduces new people to the content that we make here.
That is right. Please keep those coming. We got a new rating this past week, but they didn't leave us a review, which I forgive you for, because you gave us 5 stars, anonymous person that I don't know. So thank you. Thank you for that.
Yes, thank you.
All right, folks, we will be back next week with whatever our Patreon decides to vote for our canon episode. So we will announce that on Twitter once we know for sure. And we'll talk to you then.
My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say. My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say.